people should know that psychedelics don't necessarily give them the answers they're looking for. They don't necessarily give them the experience that they want. They'll often get the experience they need, but not what they want. And they don't automatically change behavior or habits.
Welcome to the Lara Jane Layton Show. This podcast is for you, the person who keeps putting others first. Your self-talk has held you back. You no longer need to take a second seat. Let's explore ways to overcome self-doubt. You can silence that inner bully voice and achieve your full potential. Here's your host, Lara Jane.
Welcome to the show, friend. It's your host, Lara Jane, and I am here with Greg, my new best friend. We are going to talk about and around and wherever in between psychedelics and what they can do for you and how they might be able to help. But before we get started, let's get a quick word from our sponsor and then we'll jump right in. So we'll be right back.
This is Adam Adams, co-founder of Optimized LLC, where we take the guesswork out of your health. If you're feeling exhausted, struggling with weight, or just not feeling yourself anymore, your hormones might be the problem. And that's why we test, not guess. Analyzing your blood work to pinpoint exactly what's holding you back. At Optimized LLC, we help you rebalance your hormones, boost energy, and reclaim your life. Don't settle for normal. Aim for optimized. Just go to optimize.com to book your free introductory coaching call. It's a free call to help you take the first step toward feeling your best.
All right, Greg, the information about using the show notes. Let's talk about psychedelics and how they're used. I know some people know a lot about it and some people have heard it and have no idea what it's about. So let's start kind of with the basics. What is classified as a psychedelic?
Well, there are a few different classes of psychedelics. The ones that people have most commonly heard of are probably things like a class that's called serotonergic. These are substances that will mimic serotonin, which is sort of the feel-good hormone. Pops up anytime you feel good, you get serotonin in your system. That would be like LSD, peyote, psilocybin, or what's known as magic mushrooms. And then there are some substances people might have heard of that are more exotic, like ayahuasca, which is a brew that's used in the jungles of South America. It's actually used here quite a bit now. And you'll hear of things like DMT, which is a substance that is smoked that's extremely powerful and short-acting. So there's quite a wide variety of psychedelics, but when most people talk about psychedelics, they're talking about things like mushrooms or LSD. Those are substances that will give you a very unusual experience and shift your consciousness and alter your consciousness substantially for a period of anywhere from 6 to 12 hours, depending on what you take.
Well, and I know some of those are, depending on what state you are in, okay to use, and other states are not okay. If I want a journey and my state's not okay with it, do I just need to travel to a state that does?
Well, are you asking me if you were going to do that legally?
Yes, legally.
Then legally, you would have to travel to a place where it was legal. Now, there are quite a few areas where psychedelics of certain kinds have been decriminalized. That's not legalization, but that means that the district attorneys of those areas have agreed to put those offenses at the bottom of the list as far as prosecution and basically let people slide on using or possessing small amounts of psychedelics of certain kinds. And, what kind it is varies from place to place. And there are scores of cities around the country now where psychedelics have been decriminalized. But even when they're still not legalized. Now, another option is there are quite a few government-sanctioned psychedelic trials that happen at certain research facilities. And in those, people can apply, and that's generally people who have a particular condition. For instance, chronic depression. There have been studies for smoking, for alcoholism, for depression, for anxiety. There's a very popular one that's been done by MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, for PTSD, in which they use MDMA, which is sometimes known as ecstasy, kind of a club drug that's a sort of a stimulant. But it's also an empathogen, which means it helps people experience empathy and open their hearts. And that's been shown to be very effective in people with treatment-resistant PTSD. primarily first responders and veterans. So that is another route, but obviously those slots are kind of limited. So those are generally the options if people want to have a psychedelic experience. There is a large network of underground providers in which people attend ceremonies. And of course, there are always places where people can obtain psychedelics, but those as of yet are not legal in most areas of the United States.
Okay. And you can go out of the country.
Absolutely, yes.
So it is offered regularly online if you're looking for it.
Absolutely. In
So
different countries, Amsterdam, Peru, Jamaica, different parts of Mexico. Yeah, there are all kinds of different countries that offer different types of ceremonies and settings in which psychedelics can be consumed, either individually or in a group setting.
So for me, why would I choose to do a psychedelic? I'm crazy busy. I don't feel like there's any time for me. I'm taking care of everybody else. My life's not perfect, but it's pretty darn good. Why would I search out, or what are reasons for average, professional, high achieving women to go after a psychedelic experience?
Well, I am a psychedelic integration coach. That means I work with people before and or after an experience that they have on their own or with someone else for legal reasons. I only work with people before and or after. So I see a lot of people coming at this and asking about coaching and going for experiences themselves for a lot of different reasons. Those may be existential reasons, spiritual reasons. Why am I here? What's the purpose of life? It may be some sort of spiritual religious search. It may just be like an overall anxiety. Sometimes people don't know quite what's wrong, but something doesn't seem quite right. And that generally comes from having experiences that are incomplete. So emotions are like anything else in the universe. They're born, they serve a purpose, then you can say either they transform or they die. But most things just go through that cycle. Emotions, we can stop halfway and say, I don't like the way this feels, and stop it. And when we do that, it literally goes into our bodies. Trauma, whether it has a capital T or a small t, is held in our bodies. And that builds up over time. And after a while, people get to feeling like something's wrong and they don't know what it is because there's just this uneasy feeling. That's quite a common reason people will come to either coaching or psychedelics or therapy. And then people might have some problem that they'd like to solve. There's some dynamic in their life having to do with work, the relationship, family of origin. There may be some crisis on the horizon. They're not sure what to do. So sometimes people just want to be jogged out of reality for a while. Sometimes people want to look at their lives from a different angle or perspective. Sometimes people are looking for answers that they may or may not get from a psychedelic experience. But I do tell everyone who comes to me that psychedelics are not for everyone. So it doesn't have all the answers. It's not a magic pill. And if you're looking to make a change in your life, you're probably going to have to make some sort of change in the aftermath. A lot of people hear about neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to reprogram itself and change. And there's an impression sometimes that psychedelics just go in and rewire your brain. That's not exactly how it works. So I'm right-handed. When I put this pen in my left hand, what happens immediately is and I start to write, my brain connects up left-handed and writing, which it doesn't usually do. But I can't just write left-handed now. So I made that connection. But if I want to learn but this is also a little bit awkward. I just do this automatically. When I do this, my brain is kind of yelling at me to put the pen in my right hand. It doesn't like this because our brains don't want us to do things differently. They've gone through a lot of trouble to automate the things we do and have us do things a certain way. It thinks it's for our survival, but we don't live in the kind of environment that our brains were programmed for that in anymore. But if I want to learn to write left-handed, I have to keep doing that over and over and over again and repeat it until it forms a sort of a groove in my brain. It forms a new neural pathway. That's what's often required in the aftermath of a psychedelic experience. So people should know that psychedelics don't necessarily give them the answers they're looking for. They don't necessarily give them the experience that they want. They'll often get the experience they need, but not what they want. And they don't automatically change behavior or habits. You can have a transcendent experience on a psychedelic and then realize in the aftermath that you're going back to the same habits, patterns, ways of being and thinking that you were before, because those are wired into your brain and it takes some effort to change those.
So that's where someone like you comes in is, hey, I'm really struggling with my self-worth. I don't feel I'm valued. So I don't know what it is. I can't pinpoint it. I know I do good at work. I know I have good kids. I know my spouse likes me, but there's something in there that just doesn't feel right. Something's not me. And I could say, Greg, help me. I'm going to go do this mushrooms. And and we can talk about how would I pick or how would I choose what kind of mushroom experience I want? I mean, I've heard of microdosing. I've heard of hero doses. But what are those things and how would I pick what I'm looking for because I got to look somewhere.
Well, microdosing is taking what's generally about 1/10 to 1/20th of a psychoactive dose. And a psychoactive dose just means the point at which I can tell I've taken a psychedelic. Like something's different. My consciousness is being altered significantly in some way. About 1/10 of that dose is what we refer to as a microdose. And that's generally subperceptual. I don't have any psychedelic effects. There are small doses you can do to feel something, but microdosing is generally something you don't actually feel, but it has an effect on you somehow. Now, so far, it has not been statistically or scientifically proven that the effects people get from microdosing is not due to placebo effect. That's just because there's not a lot of research on the subject. And it's not as easy to conduct research with microdosing as it is with like a full dose of psychedelics. You can put people in the lab and say, here, take this psychedelic. You're going to be here 6 hours, and then we're going to test you later. But microdosing is something that you do daily for a while in order to feel the effects. So microdosing is quite different from a psychedelic experience. People often ask me, should I microdose for a while so I know what it's going to be like when I take psychedelics? And if you didn't know that the two substances were the same, just dependent on dose, you would never be able to tell, because there are really no effects with microdosing except for you might feel better. Sometimes you might not feel good because sometimes microdosing helps bring things to the surface that are sort of stuck inside you. So some people might get quite anxious or upset by microdosing. It's, again, not for everyone. Then you have a dose that's psychoactive, where you would probably be with a sitter or someone who's watching you or someone who's experienced, just to make sure you're comfortable and nothing happens to you. And then when you talk about something like a heroic dose, I really dislike that name because to me it's very patriarchal, misogynist. It really says that, if you take a lot, you're a hero, and you don't need to actually. A smaller dose of psychedelics can be quite profound. I have nothing against people taking larger doses, but I don't think that people who take smaller doses are not heroic and people who take larger doses are. There's a lot of research that can be done around what kind of psychedelic you want to take. And really, magic mushrooms, if you're going to take a psychedelic, it's probably one of the safer routes because it's physiologically one of the safest substances you can take. There are more 911 calls every year for alcohol and aspirin than there are for psilocybin. And it doesn't last too long. It's maybe 4 to 6 hours. LSD can last 12 hours. Ayahuasca, you throw up and it's got a heavy body load. Psilocybin is just a little bit of an easier route. Now, people could also, if they don't have psychedelic experience, they want to dip their toe in the water, they can also try things like breath work. Holotropic breath work, which was developed by Stanislav Grof, is a very psychedelic experience when it's done. And certain kind of cannabis experiences. There are actually people who facilitate cannabis experiences now that can be very psychedelic and be very deep and give you a good idea of what might happen when you take a psychedelic. But I will say that you never know what's going to happen when you take a psychedelic. So What kind of experience are you going to have? You really have to research, and sometimes you'll just get a feel for what it is.
All right. So I've hired you. We've had our sit down. I've told you what I want to get out of this. I just want to figure out why I feel not quite all there or not quite all light. And so then I go through this psychedelic experience. over? Is it like a one-time thing any old day of the week, or is it something you need to do 3 or 4 days in a row?
No, generally, there are some ceremonies, including, for instance, ayahuasca ceremonies, are generally like multi-night, at least 2 nights. It's an unusual substance because it's more powerful the second night, even if you take the same dose. That's unusual. But most of the time with the people I'm working with, they will have one experience, and then we'll work after that.
Okay. And then we just chat and talk about what I experienced. How did it help me understand my own displeasure in myself or whatever? And that's how an integration coach works. You just work a week or 2 afterwards.
I generally see people at least 3 or 4 times afterwards, spaced out about a week. And rather than just chatting, we do chat, but there are things that happen in the lead up to the experience, in the experience itself, and in the aftermath of the experience that will give me some clues to what's happening with you as an individual. And that can be very different with a lot of different people. We'll also call our attention to what's happening in our lives and how the problem that we were talking about manifests. So before, you were talking about maybe a sense of self-worth. Someone just doesn't feel like they're good enough. That's a very common thing for people to feel. Well, that feeling will lead to me acting in certain ways in my life. There are things that I will do and interactions I will have with people that will validate that feeling over and over again. That's how the human mind works. When I feel stuck in a particular feeling, there are ways that I will act that are not beneficial for me if I don't want to feel that way. Also look at what those patterns are and what kind of changes people can make so that they're not acting out those patterns anymore now that they have this realization about themselves.
Oh, sounds simple enough. What should be my pros and cons? Is this for me beforehand? What is it that I should think about? Do we need a certain health standpoint in our, do we need a certain amount of yoga or meditation experience prior to going in? What are my prerequisites, and what is that decision chart that I probably need to look at to see if it is for me?
Well, you should look at see if there are any contraindications. And one of those can be like medications I take. For instance, certain antidepressants will act on the same receptor that many psychedelics do. So if someone's taking SSRI, which is a very common kind of antidepressant, those act on the serotonin receptor. That's the same one that like mushrooms and LSD will act on. So there is a possibility of those drugs muting or even completely blocking the effect of a psychedelic. There are health conditions you might want to consider. Most people are healthy enough to take psychedelics unless they have something physically wrong with them. There are certain mental conditions. If someone has experienced psychosis directly or in their family or bipolar disease, they should probably not be taking psychedelics. It's usually advised not to do that because it may untether them further. In the case of bipolar, it may lead to manic episodes of mania. And in psychosis, like schizophrenia, it may cause someone to become a little bit more unmoored. Psychedelics, most people need to be a little bit like yanked away from reality for a while so they can see things. That's not what people with schizophrenia need. They're already in that state. They don't need to be pushed further. So there are definitely health and medication considerations to look at before you enter into that. As far as anything else, learning how to meditate is beneficial in many ways. It can help in a psychedelic experience, especially if you're uncomfortable, but it's not a requirement. If you're healthy enough to take psychedelics, you're not taking a medication or don't have a condition that's contraindicated, then what you probably should know is you may be very uncomfortable during the experience. So you hear about something called a bad trip. Well, psychedelics, we talked before about how people stop emotions and put them in their body, and those build up over time. Well, one of the things that psychedelics can do is to help you feel that emotion because that's the only way it gets out of you. And there's really no way to just extract that. If I'm feeling a certain emotion, I'm going to have to feel that emotion pretty strongly for it to get out of me. That means that I can be very uncomfortable. So when you go to apply for one of these clinical trials we talked about, They often ask a question saying something like, I would like you to imagine the most uncomfortable psychological state you've been in the last few months, and ask yourself if you're willing to have that amplified 5 to 10 times, because that's a distinct possibility. It doesn't mean that something's wrong. It's actually what the substance is doing to get it out of you. But some people panic during that. They don't like it. They don't want to feel it. So if you're not willing to go through that discomfort, which is a possibility, it's not a certainty. Nothing is certainty in the psychedelic experience, but it's a possibility. If you're not prepared for that, it's probably not the experience for you right now.
So now I've got my coach. I now know I'm healthy enough to do this. I go through with it. And what if nothing changes? I guess it's the same as if I went to a movie. It's like, it was just another fun experience.
Yes, so that's another place that coaching comes in. Another thing that you should know ahead of time is these things don't change you automatically. There are times when people can experience profound shifts during a psychedelic experience and just sort of be different in the aftermath. But it's far more common that someone will see something that needs to change in their life and then afterwards not do anything to make that change, sort of wait for the psychedelic to make the change. And sometimes the only way to for a pattern to be broken is for you to break a pattern. It's still probably going to be up to you to make some change or shift in your habits, patterns, ways of being and thinking somehow to change as a person, which is quite boring compared to a psychedelic experience. Learning to make my bed every day or be disciplined somehow or do something that I don't want to do. Mostly people come to this because they are doing something they don't want to do, not doing something they want to do, feeling something they don't want to feel, or not feeling something they want to feel. And it's necessary to make some change. And your brain, for many reasons, does not want you to change what you're doing. Thousands and thousands of the things that we do every day are absolutely automatic. And there are a lot of reasons for that we could talk about, but just know that your brain has automated things and it thinks it would be a very bad idea for you to change. That's why I'm uncomfortable when I put the pen in my left hand, because my brain's saying that's not what we do. My brain still thinks it's 15,000 years ago and that I need to find some berries and eat them before winter gets here because there's not going to be any food and I need to compete for resources. So it's automated a lot of things for my survival. It doesn't understand that that's not the environment we live in anymore, but it still thinks that everything we do is absolutely critical and it should stay that way and will make us uncomfortable or make us resistant to change in any way. So you're going to have to go against your body's and your brain's resistance change in the aftermath, quite likely, to make some sort of change to get you to the place that you wanted to get to when you came to the psychedelic experience in the first place.
Oh, great. It's not a magic pill. I want that thing I just have to take and I'm changed.
I can't tell you how many times people say, I'll tell them it's not a magic pill. And they say, I know. And then in the aftermath, they'll say, I did know, but somewhere I was just hoping it would be a magic pill.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the back of me, like, maybe it'll happen.
Hoping it made this a little bit easier.
Yes.
So, coming in with those goals, coming in with what you really want, and then working with someone to make sure that's how we steer it. It's got to have a driver. And sometimes when you're out there, you forget your destination. So it's always nice to have someone to say, hey, this is where we're going. You still want to go there? We can change our minds. That's okay. But
Sure.
At least to remind that we're consciously making the decision and not just changing our minds.
Absolutely.
So I think it's been very helpful to understand the psychedelics and what they could do. What they may not do might just be a fun holiday weekend. What would be my first steps? What would be that thing that I need to do to really decide if this is what I want to do? Like we've talked kind of about I want that pros and cons. I could stay the same. I could change. Doesn't matter. How bad do I need to be somebody different? I'm kind of happy with who I am. I do know there's things that I'm okay if it keeps changing and getting better, but where is that happy balance of doing this for the right reason? I'm not saying use the wrong reason if you just want to experience it, but a lot of us want to succeed and want to grow and want to progress in our paths or towards our goals. And this could be one of those stepping stones, right? This may help you get there a little closer.
It may. And generally, when people come to me like that, I'll ask them what they've done up to this point to go towards that goal. And, sometimes people say, I've been to therapy and coaching, and I did these self-help things, and I read these books, and I went to seminars. A lot of people who come to me are like that. But sometimes people just come to this thinking it's the first thing they should try. And I'll let them know that there are options outside of that experience. I mean, they're adults, they can make their own decisions, but it's not the final word, and it's not the only thing that you can do. But as far as what your first step would be, if you did want to take that route, I would say to hit the internet and do some reading, and not just people's trip reports or what they said about it. Go to some place where they sort of digest and distill the scientific research to date to find out if whatever you're experiencing is something that people have experienced and had successful results with psychedelics. In most areas they have, but you should be realistic and know what the realistic expectations are and what you may or may not have to do in the aftermath.
Yeah, had a lot of friends that have gone through some type of psychedelic or multiple different kinds of psychedelic. And the question, would you do it again? And it's about 50-50. 50% of my friends like, absolutely, it was life-changing for me. It was the best thing I ever did to, kind of that ceremony, reface, redirect, be this person. And the other's like, I don't feel like it did a thing. I don't feel like I changed. I don't feel like, but it was okay. And then you definitely hear the horror stories. I will never go do that again.
It's not uncommon for people to have that feeling, to have that. And it's quite common, actually, for people to say, no, I don't need to do that again. And with many people, within a few months, they're saying, I might do that again. But that's one of the reasons that psychedelics are not considered to be addictive. I mean, anything can be psychologically addictive. You can become dependent on anything, but they're definitely not physically addictive. Like, you don't feel right away like, I'm going back and doing that as soon as I can. Most of the time, you kind of feel like, I'm good. And the length of time that lasts varies from person to person.
You're probably in the same age group as I am that went through and we had those, this is your brain and this is your brain on drugs commercials.
Yeah. I remember those commercials, yeah.
And nobody wants to be the fried egg, and how do we get out of that programmed mindset that this is drugs to this is plant medicine? This is something that will help. How do we because there was a real big, and it just lumped all drugs together. It didn't tell you what kind. They were saying this is your brain on drugs. They were just saying this is drugs. And so how do we look at what could be neutral or good for us versus unhealthy?
Yeah, so far, the stories about people, I remember talking to a person once when I first got into this field saying, yeah, but what about all the people who are like jumping out of buildings? So, well, there's not a lot of people jumping out of buildings. There have been some isolated cases where people took a lot, probably too much, in some cases where people were given these things against their will, sometimes by the government, actually. But once again, if people just read the truth and read what's been happening, because there are a lot of people who have used these now and who come to these for healing or for different purposes. And you can see that there have been some accidents and some mishaps and things like ceremonies when people were attended in South America or something, but people are not dropping like flies from taking psychedelic substances. You would have to take a lot of the psychedelic substance to actually have it be harmful to your body. And a lot of the information that came out during the late 60s and 70s, there was something saying that, if you took LSD, it would actually alter your brain and change the DNA forever. And, none of those things are true. In fact, it's been proven now that a lot of psychedelics promote neuroplasticity, which is the ability of your brain to change in positive ways, and actually increase the amount of certain substances like BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which help people's brains develop and help them deal with things like depression or different conditions. So it's just a matter of education.
So don't pay attention to the commercial. Some drugs, yes, we don't know, but research. So
Yeah,
what is
absolutely.
it that you're looking for, and do the research? You talked a little bit about THC, just as that minor kind of thing. And more states are legalizing or decriminalizing THC. Is it a good substance to do this with, or it's just an experience?
Well, cannabis can actually be quite psychedelic and can have a very profound experience with it. There are people now there's a guy named Daniel McQueen in Boulder, Colorado, that runs an organization called Medicinal Mindfulness, where he trains people in how to do what's called a conscious cannabis circle. And in that, you'll imbibe cannabis and you'll put on eye shades, you'll listen to music and work with a guide who takes you through the experience. And it can be quite psychedelic. I think anything that alters your consciousness to that extent can certainly be beneficial to you. So I view cannabis as an ally, as something that can be a psychedelic experience, and something that will give someone sometimes a very good idea of what might happen if they use a psychedelic substance. And it's something that's legalized in a lot more areas than psychedelics are.
I know that I live in the state of Utah, and medical marijuana is fine here. And I know that they're looking into decriminalizing the psychedelics, but it's not passed yet. But I do know some states that have. And so, Oregon is one of them. You could go there, and at least it wouldn't be criminalized. I don't know if California has got the psychedelics decriminalized it.
There are cities in California like Oakland where certain psychedelics or plant medicines have been decriminalized. In Oregon, it's actually legal to do psilocybin therapy with a certified administrator or facilitator there now. And there are whole programs set up to train people in psilocybin facilitation.
Okay. I do know that there's also places that haven't decriminalized it that honor the religion. This is part of our religious ceremony. And so this is what we do. And so they're still able to get through as long as they have church records.
There are two different churches that are allowed to use ayahuasca in certain settings and certain locations. Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways to get around the illegal part, and going to South America or Mexico are also options. But it's after the research. Do your research. Look at the different types of. I know that you didn't ever mention bufa. I'm guessing it's just a different. I don't think it's the one that makes you happy.
No, bufo is the secretion from the Bufo alvarius frog, the Sonoran desert frog. And it is a substance that is not so much psychedelic. It's very powerful and very short acting. And what it does most of the time, it can be psychedelic, not as psychedelic as sort of. So it's also known as 5-MeO-DMT is the substance within bufo that is active. That substance at sufficient levels will pretty much almost turn off the default mode network of your brain. That's the part of your brain that holds you. It tells me I'm Greg, because Greg is really a collection of memories. And when the default mode network, which collects your memories and sort of constructs your personal narrative about who you are, when that thing gets very quiet, you sort of go away, and that's known as ego dissolution. You just may experience yourself as part of everything without realizing that you are an individual or person. It is a very powerful experience that has to be facilitated very carefully, because if you take too much of that, it can be quite unbalancing. I've worked with people who have had difficulties with that experience, and for months they can be knocked off kilter. So one of the places that I work doing integration for is a retreat center in Mexico, and they're very careful about preparing people and slowly working them up to a sufficient dose. That's a substance that people should approach with real caution. So that's the reason I don't usually mention it right off the bat. It's sort of out of the ballpark of what I would call normal psychedelics, not usually what people start with, although some people do, strangely. And it's something that you need to tread very carefully around.
It's all who you know, right? I think shrooms is probably the most common that I know that
Yeah.
people other than THC. Cannabis it's the everyman's game now, right?
Because you can grow both of those. That's why they're so popular.
That's probably true.
Growing mushrooms is very easy. It's not my thing. I'm not into mycology, but just about anybody can grow psychedelic mushrooms. And there are a lot of resources to learn to do that. And there are also a lot of resources to learn about psychedelics in general. Usually just about anywhere you are, you can find some kind of psychedelic society or meetup or something, or one that's online. You can go to those and ask questions. Part of your research can be asking people in the psychedelic community wherever you are or wherever you can tap into.
I love it. So, Greg, I don't have any other questions because I could just keep talking forever because I'm exposed to it, but have not dug in and really learned. I know people who microdose every day. I know people who take these major, massive journeys every weekend. It was what works for them, right?
Yeah.
And up to this point, I did go through one mushroom journey. And, I just haven't felt the need to do it again because it didn't feel like much. I just felt like I was an equalizer, those things that play with music. And I did that for 4 hours. I just... That was my trip. So I do know that everybody has a different experience. And I don't know what I went into it for, more just what is everybody talking about.
Sure.
But I didn't have an integration coach. I did have somebody with me. I had a babysitter. And they said they would be an integration coach, but I never talked to him again after the experience. So I think that would be great to have that after, talk about it and discuss your feelings, even if it's somebody you went there with, where, you got to have that dialogue where you could tune into it. So why don't you give us how to get a hold of you, what what is it why do you want to be on a podcast and share this amazing knowledge? And then what is that one thing we can do, even without a psychedelic today, to help us gain back some of our power?
Well, people can always find me online on Facebook, Greg Lawrence. My website's greglawrencecoach.com. Very easy to find me. The reason I do this because 10 years ago, I was in a very difficult place in my life, and I had not used any illicit substances for about 25 years before that, because in my youth, I became addicted to drugs. So I just stopped using everything. And then my life got dumped upside down about 10 years ago, and I didn't know what to do. And in the process of working with a coach and a therapist, I also turned to psychedelics. And I had a profound experience that showed me everything going on in my life. And I thought, well, now that I've seen that, everything's going to be different. And a couple of weeks, everything was the same. Rinse, repeat a couple of times, that kept happening. And then I found out there was something called psychedelic integration, which I had never heard of. So I started researching and found out that you had to do certain things in the aftermath to take advantage of the things that you'd learned and seen, and started figuring out how to do it myself. And it was very helpful. Then I started seeing changes in my life. So the reason I do this is because it was very helpful for me. And it's something I'd learned for myself. And I have probably a little bit different angle than a lot of integration coaches. So I feel like I'm kind of the help that I was looking for at the time.
Isn't that what it's so common is like, I was looking for this.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be there for someone else,
Exactly. Yeah.
Years ago, when I started teaching women's handgun use, it was, I needed it. I couldn't find somebody who could teach a woman without being condescending. So I started doing it. And now you can find them a dime a dozen. So I waste my time. So yeah, it's like, what is that thing where I feel like I could feel the gap that I experienced?
Yeah, exactly.
So I love it. Well, thank you for filling the gap.
Well, as far as something you can do yourself, what many people come to this experience with and even come to coaching with is sometimes feeling a little bit out of control and a little bit getting anxiety, not knowing what to do. So let's go over what we call a recovery strategy. This doesn't keep you out of anxiety, but if you get tipped over into where things don't feel so good, it may help you get centered again. So I'll try it with you.
Okay.
First thing I'd like you to do is to check to see if the back of your tongue is against the roof of your mouth. And if it is, just let it relax. And the back of the tongue goes against the roof of the mouth in preparation to speak. And if you don't speak out loud, just start speaking inside. So relaxing in the back of the tongue cuts down on the internal chatter, which can be not so helpful sometimes. And once the back of your tongue is relaxed, just check to see if your jaw is a little tight and allow that to unhinge a bit. Jaw is connected to the vagus nerve. That's a channel of nerves that touches every organ that goes through your body, and it brings you out of fight or flight. So when you relax your jaw, you're sending a signal to your body saying, there's nothing wrong. And then you're just going to let your breathing slow down a little bit to the extent that you might have a little bit longer of an inhale, a little bit longer of an exhale. And ideally, you want to have an exhale that is twice as long as your inhale, whatever that is. That's another signal to your body saying, I'm breathing deeply and slowly, so nothing's wrong. So when the back of your tongue's relaxed, jaw is unhinged, you're taking slow, deep breaths and inhaling twice as long. You're getting rid of more carbon monoxide and bringing in more oxygen. And you generally feel things slow down a little bit. Now we're able to recover a little bit, not be so off center. Get back to what we're doing.
That was fun.
Yeah, I like that.
It's all things that I do in my own process when I'm getting stressed.
Yeah.
That was very, very seldom, though. Thank you, Greg, for joining us today. I really appreciate your time. Friend Greg and I are not medical or mental licensed professionals. We're here for entertainment. We are not a substitute for your doctor or your therapist, but we have been down that road and we've experienced some things. And if we can shine a little light on your road to help you along your path, that would bring us joy. Thank you so much for joining, and stay tuned for the next episode.
Are you tired of waking up exhausted? You are not alone. If you're looking to take your life back, let's start with the simple step of adjusting your self-talk. Stay tuned for the next episode with your host, Lara Jane. Remember to follow the show so you don't miss the next simple step that you can use to feel more confident. And please leave an honest review.